Well, hello, everyone. I think we can get started. My name is Glenn Wright, and greetings to everyone wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the local public sector Europe and Central Asia Working Group meeting. And later in the program, you'll be able to learn more about what the working group is doing on decentralization and local governments. I'll be very brief in this introduction because, as you can see from the agenda, we have a lot of interesting presentations and material to cover. So time is a constraint on us. I would like to note one change in the agenda, and that is before we proceed with the program, we are very fortunate to have the participation of two mayors in the program today. And I want to acknowledge them. The first one is Yaroslav Sarvikin from Peroshchepin municipality, which is in the eastern region of Ukraine and very close to the conflict areas. And we have Bohdan Kelchavi of Kopachenitsa. It's a municipality in the western part of Ukraine. I probably not pronounced them correctly, but they will correct later. Anyway, we want to take full advantage of their being in this program with us because they have the frontline firsthand experience and can provide a real perspective on what has occurred in their local governments. And time permitting, we'll get remarks on specifics of how they have managed to meet these challenges. During the presentations, we'll put some links in the chat box that provide more detailed information on how local governments have adapted to these challenges. So look for those, you can download them, and also put your questions in the chat box and we'll try to respond. I believe that all that is being presented today, I believe will be put on the website so you can look at there for more information and more detail and particular interests that you have. But let me say also that if you want to be very up to date and current and know about decentralization and conflict in Ukraine, the best source is the government's website, which is probably the best that you'll ever see. So if you want to continue to see what's happening, go to decentralization.gov.ua and you'll find, I think, the answers to almost every question that you might have. It's an exceptionally good website. Let me also say that we have a translation available in Ukrainian. So if you see the interpretation symbol down at the bottom and want to listen in Ukrainian, then this will be available to you. And if there's any problems, just please let us know if you're not getting the translation. So with these apologies for being so brief, let me begin the presentation. And it's more to try to give you some background of the timeline of what's occurred over the past 7-8 years in terms of decentralization and the conflict and how we come to be where we are today. So I just wanted to start with the beginning. Actually, this began in 2014 with this revolution of dignity, which at times was quite a violent episode. In that period, there was the occupation of Crimea and Donetsk and Lugansk regions by Russian forces and so-called local as well. And so though that the conflict situation really began in that period. Once the revolution of dignity was underway and a new government was installed, one of the primary areas of their areas of interest and priority was the decentralization of authority from the central to the local level. And they come up with this concept of the reform of local self-government and territorial organization. This was in 1914 or 2014. There are three pillars to this concept. First was the merging and amalgamation of local governments. Second was to enhance the revenues, we can hear more later, and intermunicipal cooperation. So those three features were the main components of decentralization. The decentralization began in 2015 then, and the amalgamation process of reducing roughly 10,000 plus units began from 2015, 2020. In the early stages, it was a voluntary process. There were 982 merged units in that period, at 54% being rural, 26% of the total population were in those voluntary units. At the time in 2020, there was still some units that had not voluntarily merged, and local governments were being arranged for later in the year. So there was a mandatory process for those remaining local governments, and this amounted to about 487 additional units, 33% of all the units that were merged. So we come up with a total of 1,469 units as they are today, which does not include the occupied areas in Crimea and so forth. And then in April 2019, Zelensky was elected president, overwhelmingly, 70% of the vote. He won 24 of the 25 regions, which was at that time pretty astounding given the past results. Then there were local government elections in October 2020. And then from that period of time to the Russian invasion of February 2022, the process, amalgamation, and decentralization continued at the number of reforms and features. What's interesting in this whole period is that there was surveys being done by some very reputable institutes here in Ukraine that was tracking the public's perception of decentralization and how people were looking at it. And that's what I want to present in a very quick fashion here as to how people were perceiving decentralization, how they felt about it, particularly amalgamation and revenues and so forth. And I've also added some new data from 2020 on this survey. So let me begin, just to give you here some examples. They are asking the people if they were aware of the decentralization of power and over these periods. And you can see here there was some fluctuation in terms of people's understanding and knowledge and awareness of it in this 2016 to 18 period. And then also, what's interesting is to look at this on a regional basis. And here, the Western Ukraine, central area, Southern and Eastern, you can see a fairly substantial difference in the awareness levels among these regions. And that's one of the more important features of all of this as to how this came about. Then they ask questions like, do you support the measures of decentralization? Again, we track them over these years, see some substantial changes in terms of people's knowing about them, understanding them, and being interested in what's developing. And again, we see, when you break it down by regions, a very different kind of perspective on that, from the western side to the eastern side, in terms of how they're looking at this. And I just point out one line there, which the line absolutely not. You can see that in the East, it was a much higher percentage of those who said absolutely no, decentralization, or they are rather opposed to it. So there are some variations in terms of how people are looking at decentralization in this period. Then it asks some questions about the revenues and how people were looking at them, and do they see any results of the enhanced revenues that people were getting in the local governments through the sharing of the personal income tax, grants, transfers, and other things that were the part of the decentralization process. Interesting here, you see some, for the most part, over the period, did not see any changes. Again, it takes some time to make these changes and people get a chance to perceive them. But this was just tracking how people were feeling about it over this period of time. Then on this slide, I've added the August 2020 data. And again, it's sort of the same thing about people's perception of changes as a result of the revenues to the local government. And again, it's fairly mixed in terms of that, not seeing any change or change for the worst. Even in some cases, people were perceiving that. So again, some variations in terms of how people have perceived decentralization. And here, again, we're going to see this differences in the regional or geographic breakdowns. Again, notice the east side and the south side in terms of, no, I don't see any changes, or I felt only changes for the worst, and as opposed to the western and central areas. This brings up some, interesting perceptions of how decentralization has been implemented and how it's formed across the country. Another interesting question was the process of voluntary amalgamation and whether they agreed with that or supported that or not. Again, sort of a mixed opinion on this, probably sort of evenly divided if you look at the numbers on the aggregate basis. But again, if we look at the regional breakdowns, you can see again the South and East differing in terms of their perceptions of this and their support of this voluntary amalgamation process. What will be the benefits of decentralization of power for citizens? This turned out to be quite an interesting one, and I'll make a note of a couple of these here. First is on the second line, the destruction of towns, villages, and certain cities will be accelerated. Notice that trend line. And if you go down a little further, you'll notice the one about it will lead to the emergence of local princes. These are kind of interesting perspectives of that. And later data will reveal even more about how people felt about this. And again, we have a regional breakdown. If you again look at the devastation of towns, villages, acceleration, so forth, again, the South and particularly the East have a different perspective. And also in terms of the local princes and that sort of thing, as people look at how decentralization is being played out. Here, I've added the 2020 data for this one. Again, look at the perception across the timeline in terms of the local clans taking over, the process of migration from villages and certain cities accelerated, and so forth. So as we get farther into this period, there's quite a change in terms of how people have perceived decentralization, either in positive or negative ways. Again, another breakdown by regions. Look at particularly in the East in terms of the acceleration, East and South in terms of the acceleration of the decline of villages and cities and so forth, and the local clans and so forth. In terms of how people are perceiving where the power is going and how it's affecting them. I just want to present finally the results of the survey that was done most recently in August 2020. In that, 47 of the respondents that did not feel that the decentralization reform and local increase of local revenues had delivered any change. 27% think for the better, while 12% even thought for the worst. 28% felt the transfer of power was to local clans was a result of this decentralization reform. And 22% that decentralization accelerated the deterioration of villages and communities. But 36% really hadn't determined their opinion of the amalgamation. 30% didn't support it, 16% did. So just to point out in terms of how decentralization has been perceived, there's quite a difference in perspectives. It's interesting how this has tracked over these years, and it will be very interesting to see, because remember, all of this survey was done before the local elections in 2020, and also before the conflict situation and how that has evolved. So it'll be interesting to see later on, if they do another one, how this has worked out. But I just want to present this sort of as background as to how people, the citizens themselves, have looked at this situation. If you want to learn more about this, and there's a lot of interesting data that's in this, so this is the link to that survey data of these institutes, and you can find even more information about how they have done the surveys and much more about how they surveyed people about opinions about services, quality of services, but opportunity to participate in local government, and so forth. And with that, as I say, we're trying to be very brief and quick. I'd like to invite our two mayors, beginning with Yaroslav and then Bohdan, because I want to get their perspective as they've been on the ground, how they view what has happened in terms of their local government. So if Yaroslav, can you fill us in on how it looks from your perspective?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting for this conference. So I will try to speak in English because this is some practice for me. Thank you. And in any way, we have translator, as I understood, that can help me to translate something that I want to understand. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say that I have municipality which generated 20 villages and 1 town. So we have 21 locations and about 21,000 of citizens. So as for me, decentralization reform is one of the successful in Ukraine, because we have the possibility to create one budget which can satisfy the needs of these 21 villages. So we have different ways and different possibilities to generate some investment resources which can help us to satisfy the needs of our citizens. So actually, this presentation that you presented a couple of minutes ago is very good prepared, because one of the big challenges that we faced with during this period from 2014 until now is the aggression of Russian Federation. And I actually understand that the reform of decentralization helps us to generate all people, all resources to help us combat counter the terrorists and so on. if we compare budgets of our community, our municipality, and compare it to previous periods, previous years, till creation of our community, we can see actually the big growth, because we have the possibility to control how resources, financial resources generating in our villages. We work every day with companies, local organizations. We use different tools to help our local businesses. And we actually, right now, independent in terms of decision-making process.
Yaroslav, let me break in because we're going to have a session on the revenues a little later, and that will be important for that. Let me ask Bohdan to come in as well as to how he has viewed the perspective of citizens on decentralization.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Can you see me, Glenn?
Yes.
Yes. I'm really amazed that Yaroslav speaks English. So Yaroslav, please, let's stay in touch. I need to get you involved to some activities that we're doing here. Hello everyone. We have also our municipality went through the decentralization process and it made us stronger. It made us maybe a bit more resilient. And but I don't know what's the format, Glenn. Should I run with the presentation, or we just like shoot the questions and answer them?
I just was interested in how you perceive the survey data. Does that kind of track with what you hear from citizens and so forth? That's basically it. If you can be very brief.
Yes, briefly. You mentioned that this data was collected before the previous elections and also before the full-scale invasion. So at that point, there was a huge state campaign, media campaign that was encouraging decentralization, and the level of trust to local authorities was tremendous. Now it's a bit lower because the state communicates mostly centralized way. But still, I think that I feel like a lot of people, they still trust local governance, and this is kind of like a key for Ukraine to be more transparent, like in terms of cooperating with the rest of the world. So yeah, that's my perspective.
All right, thank you. We will come back a little later on these. And again, in the interest of time, let's go to our second presentation from Alexandra Kudo. And if she can come in and share her screen and presentation, and we'll be sort of on track with our timeline. Thank you.
Just give me 1 second for sharing the screen. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, now this should be okay. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I really enjoy the opportunity to also speak here in front of 2 mayors from Ukraine, so they can correct me if they think some of my research is not corresponding to their experience. I would like to first, in the interest of what I will be speaking, I just want to summarize 3 main points which are critical about the Ukrainian decentralization reform, because as already was mentioned, they gained certain powers that made them into more autonomous actors, and these powers they were given thanks to 3 dimensions in reform. So the administrative, fiscal, which I will not speak about, but I would like to focus on the political dimension, because the idea of subsidiarity also the local authorities, local public authorities in these new units, they actually increase their competences in the services that are important for the citizens, and they received the executive bodies. And what this created actually is the citizen pressures for more accountability and ground for legitimacy and trust. And even though the Ukrainian citizens tend to be very skeptical of authorities in general, it is completely normal to have very low trust levels. The research of my colleague from Kyiv School of Economics and several colleagues from ULEAD program, Timofey Brik and a few other researchers, they found that trust to local authorities over the decentralization reform has increased more and independently than trust to the national government. It was done through statistical research and comparison, which we can see there's quite some validity in it. And so we saw that the decentralization reform created a certain incentives for the local authorities. But what also was a specificity of this reform is that the decentralization reform created a polycentric system of local service provision. Polycentric means that there are autonomous centers with prerogatives to decide on their own how they will provide the service and their economic development. And this is how such a system behaves in a crisis, and a crisis that have been created by the full-scale Russian invasion is actually a question, because it is not by default that we can expect decentralized system to perform well. But we find that Ukrainian state and statehood continues despite that the war is very asymmetric and Russia specifically targets civilian infrastructure and civilians and the municipalities, of course. And so my colleague and I, we did my colleague Oksana Hus and I, we did a survey of local municipalities last year, and we looked at how do they cope with the many challenges they face because of the Russian invasion. And we compared, and we looked for their answers to understand what mechanisms of resilience are there. And we asked our questions in these 4 types in the components: whether they planned anything, whether they prepared, what is the vertical intergovernmental coordination, how it goes, how is public engagement organized, or whether it exists at all, and horizontal partnerships. And this was a survey which was commissioned by the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities of the Council of Europe and done in partnership with the Association of Ukrainian Cities. We received 241 responses, and I just want to note that these are mostly smaller municipalities by Ukrainian standards which responded to our survey. And what we find first regarding planning, in fact, if there was a plan, it supported emergency response, but many municipalities did not have such plans. So if there is we speak about how to support resilience further, there need to be more scenario-based planning and preparing for the unknowns rather than rigid planning of command and control style. Second, we also found that digital technologies, especially e-governance, they supported the emergency response. But as you could see on the slide, many municipalities did not have that. And that tells us that e-governance should be promoted and supported. And especially, as part of it is also the data protection. That is an issue where municipalities need support how to make it happen. Now going back to vertical coordination, in crisis, that is very important that all levels of government work, share information. And we see from this slide that actually Ukrainian municipalities are quite satisfied with the information exchange between them and the district and the regional military administration. However, we see that when it comes to coordination on strategic decisions with the higher levels of government, there is a mixed picture. On the one hand, there is a perception that coordination takes place, but municipalities did not perceive that their contribution influenced the decisions. And quite possible that is because, and you can see it in the third option, quite possible it is because their feedback loops may not function properly and quickly enough and flexibly enough. So again, to support Ukrainian resilience at the local level is very important to ensure a flow of communication and exchange of feedbacks between levels of governments, and foreign partners of Ukraine can serve as facilitators of such an exchange. Going forward, horizontal coordination turned out to be very, very helpful for the municipalities, as they told us. First, membership in the local authorities associations. For example, the Association of Ukrainian Cities and the Association of the two associations of communities and also of the regional and district councils, they facilitated exchange of good practices, how to respond to different crises. Also, municipalities, when they had established links with other communities, they could help each other with things like provision of food, provision, helping in evacuation of people, and many other ways, in fact. And international partnerships, as you can see on the slide, they are very helpful, but for those who have them. It's a data from August 2022, so I'm sure more municipalities already installed the partnerships, but the help that is needed is to facilitate interpersonal contact, because that is usually where it was hard to do for our respondents. And moving on to public engagement, so first in this slide we were able to compare some of the purposes of public engagement with the survey we did with the Congress in 2022. And what we find, first, public engagement is not a feature to be nice or to show yourself as nice, democratic. It's not driven by normative purposes, but we see pragmatic public engagement purposes here, such as attracting external resources. And that means that citizens are viewed as partners, as somebody who can have external resources to cope with problems. This in turn creates this pushes to the change in the social contract in Ukraine, in fact, where citizens and government become more on the same level at the local level of governance. I also want to highlight on this slide that the local authorities function as nodal points to coordinate supply and demand, because they are situated at this local level. They know who has what resources and who has what needs. And that's why local authorities, their autonomy is important to preserve if we want to help people on the ground. And interestingly, inclusion of diverse opinion per se has gone down because we don't have time for the ritual public engagement in the situation of the Russian invasion. I also want to highlight this big slide, but it tells us again a story of dynamic between 2021 and 22. And I was really impressed to hear that about business engagement. Indeed, our slides show that when it comes to dialogue and partnership, business entrepreneurs have become much more involved as perceived by the local public authorities. And indeed, we see that businesses support internally displaced people. We see business helps also with actual security. We see, and in fact, a lot of so-called volunteers who help on the ground. They are representatives of the small enterprises and single-person enterprises. That's why it's, again, if we want to support this resilience, this is what has to be nurtured. Second point, which we see on this slide, is that non-involvement went down. So local authorities understand that in the situation of crisis, we need to involve more people. And final point, which I want to make on this slide, is that expert involvement actually went down, at least in the survey for last year. And we think it is because of the so-called democratization of knowledge. It is a recognition that local knowledge, or so-called tacit knowledge, the everyday knowledge about how to do things, is becoming very important at the local level when it comes to the solving situations of uncertainty, when any time as we speak can be a missile strike, and then we need to know what to do. So we see public engagement has become deeper and wider, and it is also more on the same level, rather than authorities being higher and citizens being lower in terms of hierarchy. To summarize my findings and our findings from the survey, we see 3 points. First of all, decentralization reform created this, we should see the system of so-called polycentric governance, where each unit has autonomous prerogatives, can act on their own, and it makes the whole system less vulnerable than, let's say, if we had a very centralized pyramidal system. And decentralization created favorable conditions for this within municipality cooperation, also due to this increased autonomy. That's why we need to think of security actually in polycentric terms rather than centralize all processes. Collaborative governance, the citizen engagement that I mentioned, it is also a way to legitimate emergency response, because as you know, in Ukraine, certain democratic institutions are currently not possible, such as elections. And finally, last but not least, citizens as partners. We found that the local authorities see citizens rather as partners, and that tells us about a new social contract in Ukraine. And so when we think about recovery already now, that is why it's so important to make sure that the local authorities are involved meaningfully at every step in the recovery, because this is also about a democratic recovery and, of course, democratic resistance in Ukraine. Thanks a lot, and I'm happy to answer questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very, very much. That's quite interesting how those responses in those various areas have been implemented, and the growth of the local governments and responsibilities. I want to call on Bogdan to give his perspective on this, because I think a number of those issues in terms of response to the IDPs and other things is something his municipality had to be very concerned with. So, and unfortunately, Bogdan has to leave us not too long, and I want to get his knowledge shared with everyone. So, Bogdan, can you comment on what you saw in this presentation?
Yes, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Alexandra. It's a really informative presentation, and yes, I can agree, because you mentioned at the beginning that maybe it will not correspond with the experience that we are having, but it's actually quite similar. I'm not only a mayor of a municipality in the western part of Ukraine, but I'm also quite active in the association of the amalgamated municipalities here in Ukraine. So I talk every day, like to different mayors from different regions, and see their perspective. And yes, this subsidiarity principle is really important. It's hard to compare from one side, like would Ukraine be less resilient? Would Ukrainians be less resilient if we wouldn't have gone through the decentralization reform or not? But I have a colleague who is working in Armenia, and they have I think that everybody's following that they used to have this new phase of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh with Azerbaijan. And she mentioned that because she's been working with Ukraine, also in Armenia, that they now are thinking about like having more these kind of reforms when the local governance can actually respond to what's going on and take responsibility for what's happening in the country. And if you have the influx of IDP, what we experience in my town, we didn't wait for any commands from the regional office, from the district office, because we already knew that we have own resources, that we have own expertise and own people. And it's interrelated. So like when we just when the full-scale invasion started, I think like so maybe like 7 to 10 days we didn't have any communication. We had some like but not structural communication with the regional or district offices. That's why we had to act alone, and maybe that was like a part of the story. And maybe also naturally Ukrainians are also um, trusting more horizontal uh, connections. What was seen on the survey, um, it's much easier for us to trust strangers horizontally than trust friends vertically. um, Maybe it's part of our mentality, maybe it's part of our background. Um, and yeah, it works. Regarding the associations, yeah, we have few associations, and I would describe that they have this right now. They have these relations of co-opetition. So there are some cases when the associations of local governance are competing each other. There are also some political tensions inside, but at the same time, we also cooperating in many issues. And I think it's also part of this democratic process, and that's why people also trust those institutions. Regarding international partners, yes, I also agree with Alexandra, because um, those municipalities that they have, if they have capacity, if they have understanding of and feel comfortable in this international partnership environment, then they can really utilize um, the all the like potential of this. But at the same time, um, yes, it's a democratic country, and we have democratic elections. And unlike in United States or other Western countries, we don't have city managers as institution. So it's basically mayor is a city manager at the same time, and democratically anyone could become a mayor. And if this is not their background, if it's not something that they can learn fast, maybe their municipalities don't see any use out of international partnership and cooperation. But I also agree that it becomes more trendy every time. And now, in my association of in the association of municipalities where I'm active, as I mentioned before, I receive a lot of requests from a lot of municipalities that like, how can you help us find international partners? How can you help us find a sister city and things like that? So this became like a very trendy, and everybody want, maybe even not fully understanding, but a lot of municipalities really want to have international partners. And um, also saw some survey last week that about 92%, if I'm not mistaken, Ukrainians want to integrate with the European Union. So this is the moment when we have the least possible skepticism of Ukrainian towards moving west. Maybe also without understanding all the concepts, all the details, but this is something that we feel, and we feel as mayors what our people think, and we also, as Alexander mentioned, try to um, take our citizens as partners. We also know the need, because they just personally know where we live and how to knock our door, or text us, or call us. And at the same time, we try to find some resources. And this is really important. If this decentralization process, there is a big fear that it's going to be ended soon, because naturally central government wants to centralize, and the local government want to oppose to that. But having having inside a war, it's like it's hard to resist. You cannot find arguments against this, against centralization from the local level. But so far it's a great instrument and it's a great tool, and we're happy to use it in favor of our citizens. There is a question from Anthony.
Bogdan, thank you very much for that. I'm curious whether there's been any institutionalization of the cooperation between local governments and the voluntary sector, or local governments and businesses have regular forums emerged to discuss the issues at hand. Are there procedures for trying to bring people together to solve particular problems, or is this, voluntarism just working its way through things as it does on the basis of people's individual energies?
Thank you, Anthony. It's a good question. I would describe it, but it's again like I'm not doing any researches or surveys. I can just only say what I feel like from the empirical point of view. I think that at this stage, Ukraine is more like a startup nation in all the perspectives. So it's hard to do any like long-term strategy, and that's why we just like create so many new NGOs, so many charity funds, so many like business associations, and it comes from cities, it comes from private initiatives, it comes from businesses. Those initiatives, I mean, it comes from central government. It's like if you think of some institution that works with the NGO sector or works with a business in this particular region, you could find several of them, and maybe this is okay for this period of time when there is no like recipe, like, hey, we do this and this is the agenda and this is what we have to do. That's why like it's a lot of startups and new tries, and it's like everyone can become a volunteer. Like, let's say your relative is in the army and you want to like help him get something, or you or somebody from your family or from your friends died in the war zone, and you have some injuries or have some IDP. You see the problem and you try to solve it, and sometimes it turns into charity funds, sometimes it grows, sometimes it can be merged or united with something, or sometimes it can fade away, like when the mission is complete. So at this moment everything is boiling, and there are a lot of space for new initiatives regarding institutionalizing. Yes, everybody tries to do that, I think, but is there a good time or not? I don't know. Maybe it's still time to let it boil and be like that as it is now. I don't know.
Okay, let me intervene here. We need to move on to next presentation. Yaroslav, I'll call on you after the next presentation. And thank you, Bogdan, for your contribution. I know you've got an important meeting to go to there, working on the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. So thank you again, and look forward to further contact. Let's go to the next presentation, which is quite one which is quite a hot issue in Ukraine over the past couple of years, and this involves the local government revenues. And Sorin Herbst and Vitaly Polypin, are you ready to share your presentation?
Glendal, thank you very much for inviting us to this meeting. And indeed, we are right and ready. And I can share something with you. I would like to say some general remarks on You Lead with Europe first, as it was dropped several times before in this meeting, and before Vitaly then takes over for the fiscal and taxation part. So if I may share also something with you. Here it is. Can you see it?
Yes, very good.
Yeah. Super. So I try to be really quick. So You Lead with Europe is a multi-donor initiative funded by the European Union, Germany, Sweden, Poland, Denmark, Slovenia, Estonia, and our partner ministries are the Ministry for Restoration, former Min region, now merged with the Ministry for Infrastructure and the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. And at You Lead with Europe, everything is about empowering municipalities and strengthening local self-government through decentralization. Skip a little bit here. So you talked about the timeline already. We are here since 2016. The Ukrainian government has called us, so to say, to support decentralization reform, and that's what we are doing. And we see, if we look at it today, that indeed the effects have been positive. So decentralization reform is a success story in Ukraine. Some people say it is the most successful reform, maybe comparable with the police reform, but one of the most successful reforms in Ukraine. We have an increase in the local budgets. We have many facilities transferred from the rayon level to municipalities. We have administrative centers for better services for the citizen, and we have much better intermunicipal cooperation. Decentralization is what we support. Yes, decentralization serves important goals. We have a more resilient statehood. We have a more inclusive democracy. It serves better municipal services. It serves a lower level of corruption. And this is a topic we are now investing a lot in. And it's also a local initiative for development of the local level in Ukraine. And You Lead with Europe is so unique because it is unique, mainly because of our regional structure. So we have 24 regional offices in each oblast of Ukraine, and we are ready to reopen regional offices, our contact points, our ears and eyes on the local level, also in the temporarily occupied areas, again, as soon as it is safe. And as I always say, we are also ready to open one on Crimea, hopefully one day. Our political partners, I mentioned already, the donor states as well. And yes, an impressive number, 173 million euros have been implemented already in this time. And on the upper left side, you see the bread and butter business of You Lead with Europe, which is capacity development. So every day we are providing specialized trainings in different formats and consultations for Ukrainian municipalities, meaning for mayors, heads of departments, city councillors, starostas, and other representatives of the local level to train them in how to use the new responsibilities and tasks that were given to them by the decentralization reform. We also support local and regional development projects. We take part in the elaboration of important laws and regulations. On the right side, upper right side, very important because decentralization is not finalized. It's not done yet. We stand maybe half path or maybe 2/3, and a lot of laws and regulations need to be adopted. And some of them are not existing. Also, some points are so important that the constitution needs to be changed. So a lot of work has to be done, and we are consulting Ukraine also on that. And with this being said, maybe I leave it here. There are so many more things to say, but I don't want to take more time. And I would like to give the floor now to Vitaly Pilipiv, who is financial advisor in my team, to talk about the specifics of taxation and fiscal policy on the local level. Thank you very much.
Dear colleagues, thank you for invitation. I will try to share my presentation. Well, fiscal capacity and fiscal issue is just one direction in which You Lead with Europe is involved in providing some expertise for the government and providing some recommendations to implement this fiscal decentralization reform. The important feature of decentralization is the capacity of local governments to raise tax revenue, to mobilize tax revenue. And since the beginning of the decentralization reform, since 2015, local governments have significantly strengthened their fiscal capacity. But there are still a lot of issues that should be developed and new challenges that appeared during the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. So currently, the most significant impact on fiscal capacity of local governments, in our vision, can be achieved through revision of two taxes: personal income tax and actually personal income tax payment mechanism, and improvement of property taxes administration. We have conducted a number of studies on these topics, and I'm really glad to see here Tony Levitas, who is our good partner, and we have discussed a lot about the PIT payment mechanism, and we have very similar vision in this direction. So this presentation will be about these two taxes. But let us see what these taxes mean for Ukrainian local budgets or budgets of municipalities. PIT and property taxes, it's about 80% of all tax revenues of local governments. And if we look at 2021, the year before the war, and 2022, 2023, we can see that property taxes have a trend to decrease, and personal income tax increased in the structure of local local budgets. The next slide is about the full structure of local revenues, including transfers, and they are about 30% in different years. So let's start talking about PIT payment system in Ukraine and why it needs to be reformed. PIT in Ukraine is not about the potential to raise additional revenues. It's about the fairness of the system and effectiveness of the system of distribution of these funds between local governments. PIT is the most important revenue source for local governments. And since 2022, share of PIT in local revenues maintains its upward trends. However, the main reason of this is military PIT. It's a PIT from payments to military personnel. At the same time, ordinary PIT have decreased in these years. What are the key shortcomings in PIT payment system in Ukraine? According to our legislation, personal income tax is allocated to local governments of territory where employer is registered, not where people work or where people live, but where it is registered. For example, headquarters can be registered in Kyiv, as in most cases, and its separated units can be located in different hromadas, and all PIT will go to Kyiv. And it makes big disparities between local governments in their capacity to raise these PIT revenues. After the war has started, this challenge appeared to be even more dangerous for the whole system, because municipalities in which military units are located, they received much more PIT than they even can spend. And this promotes our government to initiate withdrawal of military PIT from local governments to the state government, and to spend this money for the army and for the armed forces. So we are trying to develop the system under which we can support our government to change peat allocation system, peat sharing system, and make at least some part of peat to be allocated to the local governments where people live and consume public services. Until we don't know where people really live, and this is a really big issue for Ukraine now. We have a lot of IDPs and our registers don't work properly. We are trying to find some mixed system of linking of different registers, how to trace a place of residence of people and how to connect it with a place of work and payment of peat. So we had a survey of different municipalities before the war to see the scale of these disparities between the place of work and place of residence and place of payment of peat to budget. We surveyed 3 types of municipalities. It's rural municipalities, suburban, remote non-subsidized, and remote subsidized. And we noticed that in 3/4 of surveyed rural municipalities, more than half of all taxpayers work outside the municipality in which they live. As a result, the peat payments did not reach those local governments delivering major public services to those peat taxpayers. If the system would be changed, if the system is changed, we calculated that about 50–70% of peat will be increased for such municipalities. At the same time, municipalities whose labor force is being attracted from the neighboring municipalities will lose some part of peat revenue. That is why big cities, oblast centers, cities, they resist to these ideas, and some associations do not support this idea. What are the ways to develop reform strategy? Actually, I mentioned some idea already. We need reliable information on both where taxpayers work and live, and make some simulation how it will influence all hromadas in Ukraine and how it will influence disparities of distribution of this tax. At the moment, we are developing the information analytical system based on registers. It will include formation of system of relevant indicators, selection of registers that consist of this information, linking registers, and integration in a bigger information framework. For that, also, we need to find a way how to make Ukrainian residents to inform about their place of living, especially under the conditions of war. It is very important and very difficult issue, but we are developing this. Another issue, I will try to be short, local taxation and property taxes, and as a key main part of local taxes in Ukraine. We conducted a comprehensive diagnostics of local taxation system in Ukraine together with our implementing partners, Growford Institute. We involved qualified taxation experts and used established methodology developed by World Bank. It's a methodology, a property tax diagnostics methodology, and modified it to our current conditions. So, as you can see, in Ukraine, property taxes are not so important as personal income tax. Its share is quite small, less than 1%, while in OECD countries, it's average about 2% and 2%. We have The share of property tax in tax revenues has decreased by 4% since 2018, and the main reason for this is war and tax benefits for those municipalities that were occupied and suffered Russian invasion. Here is the place of Ukraine in property taxes revenue and local budget expenditure of GDP. The place of Ukraine is not among the countries with a high share of this tax revenues at the moment, and we see some potential here. So what are the main components of property taxes in Ukraine? 80% it's land tax and land rental. Real estate tax is not so important at the moment, but it tends to be increased annually. You can see that it increased for about 7% during these years. The biggest part is land rental, not land tax, land rental. Revenues from taxation of non-residential property significantly exceeded ones from residential real estate taxation, and share of revenues from taxation of non-residential property has been almost doubled during 5 years. Besides analysis of key indicators, our experts also made a big job on the ground. A number of interviews were conducted with municipalities, and here you can see the key lessons from these interviews. And what I would like to mention, among others, is that we have very different cooperation between tax bodies, state tax service in the oblast and local governments. If former employee of state tax service work for the local government, this cooperation is quite good. But if not, usually it's not so good. So state tax service is not really interested in proper administration of local taxes, property taxes. The biggest problem is registers. It's typical for many municipalities that completeness of state property right registers does not exceed 50%, and state land cadastre 80%. If we don't know what property is located in municipality, it cannot be properly taxed. So this is a big problem. Another problem is the significant number of unregistered real estate objects. They are in use, but they are not registered. And local governments have no powers to make the owners to register them. Let's go further. There are a lot of shortcomings of digital products used for local taxes and fees administration. For example, there is no information on tax debt dates. Municipalities don't have constant access to information on property tax debt. They don't know how to collect it. And they cannot fill in the registers. Actually, they can fill in the registers about new property, but it is not saved for many years. It disappears during the years. So our research touched all stages, full cycle of tax administration, and we developed some recommendations for the government. And I must mention that in governmental action plan for 2023, one of key tasks for decentralization is expanding the powers of local self-government to administer local taxes and fees in Ukraine. But we still don't see a developed draft law. We expect it will be developed maybe during the last months of this year. So here is some analysis conclusions, but I would like to show another figure. Our experts calculated a tax gap that is connected with tax rate and tax base diffusion and some shortcomings in local property taxes administration. So you can see that this is quite a big amount for local governments. And here are main reasons for this tax gap. Our recommendations are developed to help the government to make administration better, and some of them can be implemented even this year, but some of them we expect will be proposed to the government and will be possible to implement only after the war ends. Actually, shortly, it is shortly all from my side.
All right, thank you, Vitaly. I know there's questions and we will try to get to those. I'd like to go back to Andre. I think he's got his presentation ready and the sound problems. And then after that, we can open up to all the questions that we can handle in this time. So Andre, please go ahead.
Okay, I hope now you hear me better. Yes?
Yes, we hear you fine for now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, we have some problems with connection in our Kyiv School of Economics. So sorry for some interruption of this process. I should start one more time. And I started from this is pleasure to present our research here. And I want to thank you, ULIT with Europe program, who support our research, and our colleagues, Alexandra Koider and Anthony Levitas, who also support us with some advice. So coming to my presentation, I want to start that the main theme of our research was to find and explain Ukrainian resilience to Russian invasion and the role of local governments and decentralization reform in it. We should start from some background. Ukraine resilience to Russian invasion was kind of inspiration to entire the world, but people don't understand what is resilience and how we should measure it, how we should understand. And in Ukraine, we have some problems that people talk a lot about resilience and how this Ukraine is so resilient. But when we ask in some interviews for other projects what you mean by resilience, people don't understand this and give like different definition. So main theme of our article was to have some understanding of institutional resilience of local municipalities, and it came from different factors. We should understand that not only like municipalities are key in the resilience of Ukraine, it's also armed force and unprecedented social mobilization and external military and economic support. But our focus was on the theme of the local resilience. And our main objectives, as I mentioned, was to explain the role of local self-government in this process, and also to have some conceptual framework and develop some about resilience, predictors of the resilience, and context-specific knowledge. So we used mixed method approach, which I will be talk about more. But we use qualitative interviews, focus group with experts, surveys, and regression analysis. So, and main question was what predictors from the hromadas influence it that this hromada will be resilient or not resilient to the war shocks. So I think that all people understand about what we mean by hromada, what we mean about these local authorities. So I maybe skip some theoretical framework but the main point was that we also think that some changes in decentralization process. They influenced these predictors, which we will speak later, and that decentralization was some kind of catalyst of this predictors development. So what we understand about this type of shocks there, it was that war and war like in Ukraine, this is multiple factors. And we should understand that it's different types of shocks that are presented on my slide. But the main shock that we have in our article, it's institutional shock. So methodology of our research, we started from the semi-exploratory interviews to conceptualization what we understand of Hromada resilience. Then we have focus groups with experts from different kind of fields to find these predictors that can influence it in the time that Hromada had or not, be resilient or not. And then we have 2 surveys with Hromada to gather some data, and we have regression analysis based on data gathered from the open sources. So we have tested regression when we have our predictor data and some data about the resilience of Hromada. So now I will go to the next slide. And after the conceptualization of resilience, after interviews with some Hromada leaders, we have like 8 interviews with Hromadas from different types of shocks. Also Bogdan, who was today on the our event, he was one of the person who helped us with this. And we, using the methodology of the Norris about resilience, we have some 3 dimensions of the resilience. It's the preparedness, robustness, and adaptation. I will also give like examples how we operationalize this. So preparedness, we have 14 metrics of preparedness and made in preparedness index. It was about what resources and like emergency response plan and something, how Hromada was prepared before the invasion. Then we have robustness. It was 2 metrics, is some about ensure garbage collection and the administration performing due to war. So if Hromada stops this process or not stops this during the war. And third metrics about adaptation, we have like 5 questions to Hromadas in survey. What we ask about some new adaptation that Hromada can do or not do before the winter shock. So we ask them about if had they prepared special resources, had they have the generators. You can find all this data in our like article that I can share then. So to move to predictors, we have this from open data, and we have some economic development, social capital, and information communication and community competence. In our research, it's predictors by the Norris. In our research, we tested economic development and social capital. So we and then you find I can present this result. What of these predictors? We have more than 50 of them, and you can find all of them in our article also. But I present that work, and it's about also kind of operationalization. And so go to some results. Here you can see the map with Hromada surveys. We have 2 surveys. The first was launched by KC Agro Center in the June-August of 22. And the sample contains about 148 urban Hromadas and 326 rural Hromadas. And the next survey was developed by our Center of Decentralization and Regional Development plus ULEAD. Also, it was conducted in October, November of 22. It has 138 respondents Hromadas. So we combine these surveys, and we have from the survey 1, we have question about preparedness and adaptation, preparedness and robustness, and from survey 2 we have some question about adaptation. And now I present some results on map. How we see this? If it's about preparedness index, it's data about these 14 measurements, and you can see like the average point. Hromada can have 14 preparedness points, but average for Ukraine was 2 and 5. So we should understand that preparedness of Hromadas with these resources were not good. But when we come to the robustness and adaptation, we can see that from the 2 points of possible, so it was like 2 points if in Hromada garbage collection administrative function not stopped whole period of the invasion, and we can see the results that in Ukraine it was depend on Hromada like average 136, and adaptation score it also quite high, is 3.Y average from the 5. But our main focus not on like results by Hromada, but find some statistical significant correlation in regression to find what predictors influenced what kind of resilience. So now I present the result, but should start with some limitation. We understand that it was self-reported data by the local authorities, and they can like answer as they want, but we like understand this limitation. And also we understand that it's also more about institutional stability and resilience, but not whole spectrum of resilience. So about our findings, we find some predictors that we have from this all open data. They have positive relationship statistically significant with preparedness or adaptation of robustness. So on preparedness of Hromada, we find out that its influence urban type of Hromada and presence in Hromada city of oblast significant status. So we understand this. The Hromadas that was like urban and with oblast significant status, they will have better results in preparedness, but because of they owning greater resources of availability, so we all understand. And also we have positive relationship on preparedness, like own revenue indicator, so the greater capacity to mobilize resources. So Hromadas who have more own income, they have better preparedness result. And it's interesting because we don't find that like whole budget of Hromada influence in preparedness, not only like own income part influence it. So it's not that richer Hromadas who have like more money in budget have the better preparedness, but Hromadas who have more own revenue. Also important like predictor was established in the central hubs and or association. We have this predictor also. How is it in Hromada Vostlam some central hub for support before the invasion, like business support hub or some association of the business support? It also has a positive correlation with preparedness. And the main also finding is about positive relation with number of cooperation agreements. So more Hromada had cooperation with other Hromadas, the better was the preparedness indicator mark. Also on adaptation influence, it was like some regional Hromadas in the north and in this 30-kilometer zone to Russia and Belarus border had worse results, but Hromadas who had better results, and also Hromadas who are closer to EU have positive correlation to better adaptation. So Hromadas who have this all experience in the north, like in Chernihiv Oblast or in Kharkiv Oblast, who was north, they had like better adaptation results. They conducted more this adaptation to future shocks. And also we find out that voter turnout on election of 2020 local elections and number of agreements, this also with other Hromadas also influenced statistically significant number of these adaptation measurements. So Hromadas who have more people going to the election, not support the leader, but have more voter turnout, and Hromadas that have more cooperation agreements, they have better results. And the last one, robustness. So it's if we're talking about is Hromada stopped administration and some garbage administration, we have find out that in the northern region and in Hromada with urban type, with more stops, we controlled it by this wartime changes. So Hromadas that not have like a frontier in this Hromada, but were in the north region, they stopped it more oftenly. And also we found out that Hromadas with more cooperation agreements also had less of this administration and garbage stoppages. So it's we see that a number of cooperation is going through of this three dimension of resilience. So what is the main conclusion that we find out that our findings confirms the role of economic development and social capital as predictor of resilience suggested by Norris. So we found out that really some economic development measurements and social capital, they really influenced it on these dimensions of resilience. Also, we find out that important for resilience is not only amount of resources that Hromada have, but the ability to generate these resources. So we found out that Hromadas with more budget, they don't have better resilience results, but Hromadas with more own income, they have that. And also importance of both physical hubs and virtual networks for ensuring preparedness. So the Hromadas that have some this organization networks, it influences really on resilience. And with value of decentralization reform conducted in Ukraine in terms of forecasting the autonomy and ownership of local decision-making, as well as more active exchange of leading among Hromadas. So we understand that this decentralization reform, as our previous speakers mentioned, influenced it really on this own income, how Hromada can generate it, and how much they have resources to these future shocks. Also, it's influenced it on Hromada can have had this more opportunity to make these networks or cooperation agreements with other Hromadas. And so we understand that decentralization really, as also mentioned in some other researchers and interviews, it's influenced of some motivation of local leaders and like Hromadas et al. To generate more income and also to make these new networks and cooperation. As Bogdan mentioned, some association also, it's a very important tool. And the last, we understand that economic capabilities, own income, social networks, and citizen participation, they are very important for institutional resilience. And to the future shocks, we understand that we should work with these predictors, and for future shocks, Hromada have had more like these resources to be prepared to shocks, and also this motivation to be to work with adaptation and that. So I open to all the questions do you have, and also I thank you one time for as a pleasure to present it.
All right, Andre, thank you very much. That sort of rounds out our kind of knowledge and information about how local governments responded in different capacities and by different characteristics. So that's valuable. I want to ask Yaroslav to come in now and perhaps respond to the presentation of Andre in terms of how did your local government adapt? What happened in your local situation in terms of preparedness and adaptation to the situation as it developed, because you're very close to the conflict areas.
Thank you. So I agree with Andre that one of the value and the biggest forces of Hromadas, of local communities, is the autonomy and ownership of local decision making. And actually, I would like to thank the ULEAD program, because it really helps us during, especially after the Russian invasions, because one of the biggest projects that we realized after the reform of decentralization, after the 2018 in our Hromadas, is the establishment of the Center for Providing Administrative Services. This our local agencies that actually very good works, not just for improvement of generating financial resources into the local budget, but as well as it right now, after the Russian invasion, it works like the hub for supporting refugees or for providing them all their needs. For example, the foods, the clothes, and so on. We have in the Center for Providing Administrative Services more than 15% people who works with our citizens and always ready to support them. So I would like to say that after the Russian invasions, more of our workers in the Center for Administrative Services and Center for Providing Social Services work with immigrants to provide them, for example, immigrant certificate. We created in our community food security program, and we worked together with ULEAD program and with one of the organization of United Nations. This was one of the biggest our program for providing some food for refugees, because we are located near the Kharkiv region, and from the start this war we hosted more than 2,000 refugees, and this is more than 10% of our citizens in our Ramada. So this is a really big amount of people who escaped from the war, and we hosted them. I agreed with one speaker who spoke before about one of the big challenges of the generating financial resources is when people who live maybe in our community to obtain all services, all public services in our community, but for example, they can register it in our other community, or the company in which these people work as well register it in our other community. All taxes like PIT they pay in other community, but all public services they obtain in our community. This negatively impact to our local budget. But in any way, I would like to say that horizontal cooperation with different Hromadas, with different communities, and with NGOs, with business, all this support and generation of resources and the forces helps us to continue to work and to foster in improvement of our communities. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We're a little bit running over time. I think we've made a pretty comprehensive the overview of the situation in Ukraine and some of the issues. All of this will be put on the website in addition to some other documents and so forth. So I'll just finish by thanking particularly the two mayors that we had and the presenters, and turn it over to Gabor for some final words about the working group and what we're doing.
Thank you. So I'm Gabor Péteri, one of the co-chairs of this expert working group on our region. And I also wanted to thank you for all your contribution. Please don't forget that in the chat section, there are some good references of written materials, what you might want to read. What I wanted to say that this expert working group is very decentralized. The membership is flexible. Now, as you registered, you will get the news, and the next event will be on December 13. Is planned about, as we heard, the importance of twinning and cross-border cooperation. So that will be the subject of the next meeting. But in the meantime, if there is anything what you want to share with the professional community of local services about and decentralization, just use this network. We have a manager, Marina, who is able to disseminate information. If you want to put any blog on the decentralization.net website of the program, please do it. Just send your documents. If you want to use any of the resources what the program has developed, like the Logica framework, which is a kind of an assessment method of local state of governance, you are free to use it, and we encourage to use it. So, I mean, we can make this cooperation better and more effective together. So I was happy to see that at this meeting there were 40 participants. I hope at the next one will be a similarly high number. And again, thank you very much to everybody, especially to Glenn, who is based in Kiev and was able to organize this event. Thank you.